guys, it's me, Miss Bermes, and I'm going to share with you one of my favorite books. Don't squeal unless it's a big deal. A Tale of Tattletales. This book makes me laugh, and it has a great message in it just for you. I hope you enjoy it. Hope you get something out of it. Adios. Don't squeal unless it's a big deal. A Tale of Tattletales by Jeanie Ransom, illustrated by Jackie Urbanovic. This is too cute not to see. Look at that piggy. Ah! There were 19 students in Mrs. McNeil's class and 19 Tattletales. Let's take a peek. Look at that classroom. Look at those kids arguing. Ooh, and they go to school at a farm. I guess that makes sense since they're pigs. They're fighting over a ball. They're chasing after each other, and they're pointing their hooves at each other. Not me. Ah, she did that. Can you just imagine all their voices? How frustrating. It all started when Jessica trotted up to Miss McNeil's desk. Peter pulled my pigtail. That must have hurt, Mrs. McNeil said. Did you tell Peter that? Jessica nodded. Mrs. McNeil said, let's see what Peter has to say. Peter dragged his hooves all the way to Mrs. McNeil's desk. Jessica says you pulled her pigtail, Mrs. McNeil said. I did not, Peter said. Yes, you did, Jessica said. You both have the right to say how you feel, Mrs. McNeil said. You also have the right to feel safe and comfortable at school. Rules like keep your hooves to yourselves make it easier to do that. Mrs. McNeil added, but since Jessica's tail is still attached and Peter doesn't look particularly dangerous at the moment, I think it's safe to go back to your desks. Jessica stomped, Peter snorted. Mrs. McNeil started humming, The Farmer in the Dell. Mrs. McNeil had just lifted her cup of slop for a quick slurp when Stephen trotted up. Rachel took my pink marker, and she won't give it back. I even asked her twice. 2 times! Mrs. McNeil put down her cup. Stephen, I'm so glad you tried to fix that problem yourself first by talking to Rachel, she said. Maybe her ears aren't working too well. Let's find out. He looks pretty desperate. Stephen can't seem to find his pink marker, Mrs. McNeil said. Have you seen it? I gave it back, said Rachel. Oh, Rachel cried. I can't find my pink marker. That's because you used it all up, Peter said. You're always drawing pictures of pigs. Oh. Is her drawing pictures of pigs a big problem or a little problem? Is it even a problem at all? I guess it's a problem because she ran out of pink marker. But is it a problem that somebody else should be tattling about? Rachel sniffed. For your information, those are pictures of moi. What am I supposed to do? Color myself green? You know our class rule, Rachel, said Mrs. McNeil. If you want to borrow something, ask first. It's how friends treat friends. It's how friends stay friends. So here's a picture of the kids in the background. Looks like they're doing okay now. Oh, but these two are kind of bickering. And there's Miss McNeil right in the middle of it. And there's her jar of slop. Mrs. McNeil had just taken her first sip of slop when Megan announced, Frankie called Suki a fat sow. Mrs. McNeil had to gulp her slop before she could speak. She cleared her throat, hoped that she didn't have a corn kernel in her teeth. Well, I'm glad you know our class rules so well, Mrs. McNeil said. You're right. We don't call each other names. Oh my goodness. Look how proud Megan is. She's like, look, I just did something really wonderful. I just told on somebody. Also, we don't try to fix problems that don't belong to us, Mrs. McNeil said. Mrs. McNeil is being so polite. I think I might just say, we don't tattletale. I know you're trying to help, but if Frankie and Suki have a problem, it's their job to try to fix it, and if they can't, it's my job as a teacher to help them. Your job, Mrs. McNeil added, is to take care of you. That is the most important thing that job that you have. Megan danced a jig all the way back to her desk. Oh my goodness, look at her. She got that blushing cheek. Maybe she's a little embarrassed because she just got called out. Maybe she's a tattletale. That's when, get this, that's when the stampede started. Robbie breathed on me. Jonathan ripped my paper. Emily called my desk a pigsty. Laura looked at me. Jeremy's grunting and I can't concentrate. Sam's picking his snout. Oh my goodness. Look at all of these kids. Look at all them whining and complaining and tattling on each other. Oh. How do you think that teacher feels? I would think pretty overwhelmed. The students had practically worn a path to Miss McNeil's desk, and they worn out her patience. When she stood up, the students sat down. Before we go to lunch, I think we need to add a new rule to our list, Miss McNeil said. A very important rule, she asked. She added, can anyone tell me what squealing is? The students started squealing like their little tails were stuck in a gate. Squeak, squeal, squeak, 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 whack, whack, whack. I don't know how to make pig noises very good. Squealing, squeak, squeal, squeal, squeal. Not that kind of squealing, said Mrs. McNeil, shouting. She waved the cowbell. When the class was quiet again, Mrs. McNeil continued. Squealing, she said, is my special word for tattling. And I know that you know what that is. Oh boy. Oh boy. The students were being all goofy, but the teacher's getting tired. And she's saying straight up that they're going to add a rule about not squealing. New class rule. Don't squeal unless it's a big deal. Some of the students looked at the floor, some looked at each other, some looked at the ceiling like they'd suddenly seen something interesting up there. Mrs. McNeil started writing on the board. Here's our new class rule, Mrs. McNeil said. What does it mean? Jessica asked. I'm glad you asked, Mrs. McNeil said. To squeal on someone means you go to tell a grown-up when someone does or says something that you don't like, instead of just telling that person first. Most problems that happen between kids are kid-sized problems that they can work out themselves, Mrs. McNeil said, usually by talking and listening and helping each other. But sometimes, Mrs. McNeil said, something happens that's bigger than a kid-sized problem, like if someone is hurt, or if they're in danger, or when a person is hurting you, or they're hurting a pet, or hurting something that doesn't belong to them, that belongs to all of us. That's when it's okay to squeal. It's okay to squeal because if it's a big deal. But when it's a big deal, it's an emergency, and that's when you need to hoof it and get help from a grown-up. Oscar raised his hoof. I know it's not a big deal, Mrs. McNeil, but I'm hungry enough to eat a haystack. Mrs. McNeil laughed. Me too, she said. I'm sure we'll get to practice what we've learned when we get back. But that afternoon, Mrs. McNeil had barely closed the classroom gate when Katie said, Jeanie hogged the rope swing at recess. Mrs. McNeil pointed to the board. Remember what we just learned? Katie nodded. then you know you need to tell Jeanie first about the problem. Tell me what? Jeanie yelled from across the room. That you were hogging the swing, Katie yelled back. You never asked for a turn, Jeanie said. I didn't get a turn, Jeremy said. It's not my fault, Peter said. Not this time. It's Caroline's fault, Suki said. Who's Caroline? Oscar asked. She's not even part of our class, Frankie said. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. I think those kids have a bad habit, because they are totally being tattletales right now. All of a sudden, thump! Miss McNeil had disappeared. Are you okay? Megan asked. Miss McNeil didn't answer. Her eyes were closed, her tail was limp. One ear had something red on it. Quick! Call the office! Tell them it's an emergency! Somebody get the nurse! Somebody tell Mrs. Hamlin next door! Look at all these kids. They're just staring down at Miss McNeil, who had thumped to the ground. Maybe that's what happens when you have a pig for a teacher. They all look kind of worried, don't they? Later in the afternoon, the students visited Miss McNeil in the nurse's office. We're so sorry we squealed so much today, Jessica said. We didn't mean to make you mad, Peter said. Oh, goodness. It's all our fault, Katie cried. It wasn't anybody's fault, Miss McNeil said. It was an accident. I slipped on some spilled slop. It must have been quite a mess. We thought you had exploded, Jeremy said. It was pretty gross, Oscar added. Maybe you shouldn't eat that stuff anymore, Rachel said. You need to take care of yourself. Ah, they all love their teacher. It sounds like all of you took care of the problem, Miss McNeil said. Everyone says you knew just what to do when I got hurt. Only because you're such a good teacher, Jessica said. And you're such good learners, Mrs. McNeil said. We still need some practice, Katie said. We all do when we're learning something new, Miss McNeil said. So let's practice together. Don't squeal unless it's a big deal. Look at them all laughing and loving on each other and appreciating each other and appreciating their teacher and their teachers appreciating them. What a silly story. Hey guys, I hope you got a lot out of that story. It means a lot to me. I think it's just a funny story. And there's a couple things I want to go over with you. One is, if you're having an adult-sized problem, you need to get an adult to help you. You're a kid, right? That means you're not in charge of graffiti happening in the neighborhood. If you're being picked on by someone bigger than you, if you're feeling unsafe at all, or if you're in your home and something big does happen and it's big, it's an adult-sized problem, find an adult, tell an adult. Always be willing to reach out for help. Because your kid and all the adults in your life, chances are they all love you and they'll be there for you. So if it's a big problem, we call that reporting. Reporting is a responsible thing to do when you're encountering an adult-sized problem. Okay? So, first lesson, it's okay to report big problems. The other lesson is, if you find that you got that bad habit of telling on people around you, telling on the other kids around you because you want to see them get in trouble, then you need to fix it. Because tattling or squealing, same thing, right? Tattling and squealing, that is a bad habit that kind of messes with your friendships. It gets in the way of how your siblings feel about you, gets in the way of how your cousins and your classmates feel about you. It's a bad habit. You have skills. You need to figure out how to put those skills to use. If someone is bugging you, you can use a bug and a wish. If someone is bugging you, you could walk away. Find something different to do. And if that bugging keeps happening over and over again, you can ask for help, because then that means that small problem is becoming a bigger problem. The difference between asking for help and tattling is pretty clear. You're asking for help, you're asking someone to help you. If you're tattling, you're asking someone to get someone in trouble. Tattling and squealing is about getting someone in trouble. And when you become someone who does a lot of that tattling and squealing just so you can get someone in trouble, that means you're becoming someone that will bother other people and that will annoy the adults in your life. It's just not a good solution. It's like I said, it's kind of a bad habit. I hope you recognize it, and I hope you were able to laugh a little with me and enjoy the fact that these little pigs are so cute. And they have some bad habits, but they're going to figure it out because they're working with their teacher. But anyway, I hope you can figure it out too. Big problems, you go to an adult. Little problems, get creative, find a solution. Don't resort to tattling. Tattling is only about getting someone in trouble. Problem solving is about using a bug and a wish, walking away, sharing, taking turns, and asking adults for help when you can't come up with ideas. Do you see the difference? I know you do. All right, I'll talk to you later.